I thought I'd go through the history of me and FASD. I just got one of those, those things from Facebook. Not that I'm on Facebook very often these days, except for FASD. But, you get those, memory things. And it just reminded me about the journey that I've been on with this condition and how it all evolved to RFFADA and all the training and what have you. It's quite a journey, and I thought it might be interesting to some people. Who knows? If it's not, just just press delete or press pause or whatever. But this all started in 2000. So in 2000, my boys were playing. Well, before that, obviously they were playing up. They were in 2000. They would have been 17 and 20. Okay, they were born in 81 and 84. So 81 is 19. So one would have been 19 and the other would have been 17 or 16. So my oldest one had been okay as a teenager, but really when I look back on it, had every symptom of FASD as a young baby and toddler. He didn't thrive. He was constantly, and I mean constantly, at the doctors with upper respiratory tract infection. He was didn't thrive. He didn't. He would vomit. His milk would take ages for me to feed him, and then he would just vomit it up. And it was horrendous. The doctors didn't say anything, didn't do anything. Parenting courses. I know that there was one pediatrician who suggested a parenting course at that time, even at that age, but. I mean, he was right. I had no idea about how to parent a child or how to manage all these issues or any issues. I hadn't even actually held a baby, that I recall, until I held my own little darling. I remember taking him into in those days we were living out the bush, so a pub was actually the lounge room, I suppose you could say, of everybody's the extension of their lounge room. So it wasn't a place like, where bad things happen. It was just a place where everybody congregated. And I can remember the music was playing. It was really loud. I don't know, it must have been a Friday night. And I took him in his little baby, carry thing, and he was asleep and he didn't blink an eye. It's like he didn't even hear the music. Sort of stunned me a bit, but I thought, I've got the best child in the world. But yeah, yes, he is the best child in the world, but it wasn't because he didn't wake up while the music was loud. So then, after years, he started to might have even been around 12 months actually. He had delayed milestones. He didn't roll over till he was about 9 months or 12 months or something. Didn't walk until he was 18 months. But by the time he went to school, he seemed to be okay. He wasn't actually an academic child, but certainly his behaviour was good. But his little brother, Seth, that was Mick. His little brother Seth was a bit of a very easy child when he was a baby. Things got difficult when he was around 9. So from about 9 on, he was. I look back on that time now, and I don't know how I lived through it. It was that bad. There was police. There was getting out in the middle of the night. There was drug use in the house. There was drug dealing. There was stealing cars, breaking people's arms. It was, breaking our property. If he didn't punch the walls, then he would take our things to cash converters and sell them, and drug deals that went bad, and then, you know, if he didn't pay his drug deal, he was going to get beaten up. So we'd pay it. It was just a falling over, one thing after the other, and just the stress of coming home every night thinking, because he was suicidal at the time as well. He was suicidal for many years. And I would come home from work and think, oh my God, what am I going to find? In 2000, though, I had a sponsor, so I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I got sober in 98. And I had a sponsor. Now, I remember researching what was going on with my children. Seth had been diagnosed with ADHD, and so I looked to see what else had, what else ADHD could be from. And there was something on one of the state's websites called CHAD, something, I can't remember what it is, but it's CHADD. And anyway, just down the bottom it said other conditions that can cause ADHD. And right there it said fetal alcohol syndrome. And I remember just absolutely, I don't know, you know how you go all white when you think of if something happens or you've done something, or you know, in those times when you wish you could go back in time a minute or an hour and change the decision you made or what happened. It felt like that. I knew it was FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome, as it was at the time. I just knew it was. So I went to see my sponsor and I told her about this, and she agreed. She also had a child who had a disability, and so she thought it was a physical disability, so it was less recognisable as FASD, but she thought maybe that was there as well. So we both did a bit of research and both, talked about it for a while. So I looked online to see if there was any information online from Australia, and what I found was one paper, and I don't know whether it wasn't written by Sue Myers, but it could have been, I can't remember, but her name was on there and it said that she lived in Adelaide, so I did everything I could to try and find her number. And when I got hold of her, she told me that there was a very small group of people, and the organisation that she'd started in 98 was called NOFASARD, NOFASD. And she helped a lot with various things over the years, and over those years I became the birth mother contact for NOFAS, as it was at the time. And for 7 years I did that job, and then in 2007 I thought I would establish an organisation that paid homage to my boys, that I eventually called Russell Family Fetal Alcohol Disorders Association. And I thought that it could work in tandem with NOFASD. Perhaps it could be the birth parent, component of the support that was available in Australia. I didn't do a lot of work with the rffada at that time. I was really heavily into working with NOFASD. With various things. I suggested a website. I suggested that they were the peak body. I did a whole heap of work, huge amount of work. And in my naivety, I also thought that I could apply for funding for a clinic to diagnose, but I didn't have the expertise, and I was just, right out of my depth. Then what happened? I was working at the time, my paid work was with an organisation that was a not-for-profit, and they were working in disability as well. And it was around, I don't know, might have been 2012, it might have been a bit before that. I actually can't remember the dates. But Sue said that she was over it. She didn't want to do NOFASARD anymore. Nothing was happening. She couldn't see any changes. She didn't see there was a future for it. And so the organisation that I worked for agreed with her to take over NOFASARD so that they could start applying for funding and working to try and increase the profile of NOFASARD and FASD, and Sue agreed. So they put me on to looking at getting funding in my paid job to get funding to support NOFASARD as the peak body in Australia to have it recognised by the government as an organisation that could obtain, develop, maintain support for people with FASD and their families. So I did that, heavens, for months, maybe 3 months, I think. And eventually I got to the right people in government, and I got funding for NOFASARD to start. And the organisation that I worked for, the not-for-profit, spoke to Sue and told her and said, how can we start handing over the organisation? But I think by then Sue had decided that she'd like to keep going. With funding, she felt that she could do more, I think. I don't want to speak for her, but she continued on with NOFASARD at the time, which was a little difficult because the organisation obviously had invested, the organisation I had worked for had invested quite a bit of money into getting funding on the basis that they would take over the peak body. Anyway, so I put a little bit, from then on I put a lot more time into rffada. By the way, conferences I went to one in 2001. I got funding from the organisation that was the AERF, that was the organisation before FAIR. They gave me funding to go over to the Northwest Territories, to Whitehorse, to attend a conference there. And there I met Sterling Claren, who's one of the gods of FASD, who's now retired. I still keep in touch with him. He's an amazing man, absolutely amazing. And between 2001 and when I started putting more effort into rffada, I must have gone to, I don't know, at least a dozen overseas conferences, most in Canada and the United States. In the meantime, I found some wonderful volunteers. We did a lot of work with families, with individuals with FASD, with parents and caregivers who just were at their wits' end. We've established a group. We were for a long time the only group on Facebook in Australia, until Sam from the Gold Coast came along, and she's absolutely done an amazing job with her group. I'm just not on Facebook often enough for it to be a really good, solid, supportive group, whereas Sam puts so much time and effort into what she does. Her group really does the job of by group and FADA group, and she's doing an amazing job. So now there is there's several Facebook groups, so people can belong to any one of a small handful of groups. There's one in Alice Springs. There's Sam's group on the Gold Coast. There's the rffada main group where it's open to everybody, and then there's a group specifically for parents and caregivers, and only parents and caregivers are on that group, and it's secret, so it means that we can share stuff that we wouldn't normally share, talk about how our children are behaving, and know that other people are going to understand what we're talking about and why we're saying the things we're saying. Because often we'll say, oh my God, I'm just so over this. He's done it again. I had the police call. And it's only other parents who have children with FASD who will understand what we're saying. Yes, there's several groups. If anybody is interested in joining a group who's a parent or a caregiver, I do recommend Sam's group. That's the Queensland Fetal Alcohol Spectrum, or the Queensland FASD group. But if you want to be absolutely certain nobody but parents and caregivers will be listening, then there's the rffada. It's the FASD Parents and Carer Group, rffada. rffada obviously stands for Russell Family Fetal Alcohol Disorders Association, rffada. So anyway, we got to the point where I was working for the not-for-profit group. Sue and Tony asked if I would like to be CEO of NOFASD at that point, which I did for a few months. But the group that I was previously with asked me to come back, and working with NOFASD wasn't fulfilling my how would you say it? Just I guess there were different priorities and different focuses. So I went back to the organisation I was previously working with. What else? And Vicky Russell was put in place of me to be CEO of NOFASD, which she did absolutely wonderfully for 18 months. I'm not sure, 18 months, 2 years. She's now working for rffada and as a volunteer and doing an amazing job. I'm very, very lucky to have her. We have some amazing volunteers now. Sam does a lot of work for rffada. Amanda Mulligan, Adele, Rist, Louise Wilson. Look, so many, I can't name everyone. And we all do it voluntarily, and we have done for a long, long time. And I really pay my respects to the people who are doing this work voluntarily. It's not easy. It can be very troublesome, very trying, very wearying and disappointing and sad, all of those things. And yet they keep coming back day after day, week after week to do this very, very difficult job. So I continued on with rffada from that time on. We did, there were some, there have been two federal government inquiries. Not many of the recommendations have been implemented. We've had Jeff Noble out. He did some seminars in Brisbane and several other places in Queensland. I think he went into other states. It's hard to remember off the top of my head. I know I've got pages and pages of history of what we've done. I have been a little tardy lately and haven't actually put it in there, but we've certainly done a lot of work, and I'm very proud of the work that the rffada have done. Our values and our focus has always been on parents and caregivers and people with FASD. I think that while I often say nothing has changed in the 20 years, I know that it has. We've got diagnostic clinics now, one on the Gold Coast with Dr. Shelton. Dr. Fitzpatrick has got a couple of diagnostic clinics. Developmental components or parts of of community health, I think, are diagnosing. But you know what really upsets me is that we really aren't getting enough people diagnosed. They're being diagnosed with autism, they're being diagnosed with bipolar, with schizophrenia, with intellectual disability, with, just not FASD. And what bothers me is I spoke to a doctor. I asked him if he would diagnose FASD. He had a person in his clinic who had a particular interest in FASD, and I thought, well, they would be the people who would be able to diagnose an adult. But unfortunately, it came back that it was a specialist. We needed a specialist to diagnose an adult, and that's not true. GPs can diagnose. All they need to do is get the assessments from the allied health professionals and then make the diagnosis. And if there's clear, which there was with this adult, clear prenatal exposure observed, if the birth mum is there and says that she used alcohol during pregnancy, the diagnosis is not that difficult. I mean, when you've done a few, I think it gets, obviously it'll get easier. But that really distressed me no end, and I know how many people are diagnosed with autism when FASD is much more prevalent than autism. It's very distressing. It's really distressing because those people are not getting the strategies and interventions that are specific for the disability they really have. And when you add that to the fact that it's a preventative measure. So if you're diagnosing one child with FASD, you can hope that mum gets the support that she needs so that her next child is not diagnosed with FASD, doesn't have it because she's supported not to drink or she understands the implications of using alcohol in pregnancy. So that's all I can remember at this point. This is where we're at. I'm in the process of retiring. I've got some lovely people willing to take over rffada, so it will continue as a volunteer organisation. And I do feel that we've done work, albeit good work, albeit on an individual level, not a state or federal level. Although we've worked with people, it's a national organisation, rffada, so we've worked with people all around Australia. So yes, this is where we're at right now. I'm in the process of retiring. It will take maybe 12 months, but it's going to happen. I thought that might be interesting to some people who just want to know the history of FASD in Australia. I went over to, I think I was at 3 or even more conferences over in Canada where I was the only Australian, the only person from Australia. And gradually I could see more and more people coming, but it was certainly maybe, I don't know, it could have been 2010 by the time people from Australia. I could be doing some people an injustice there, but it just seemed like it was a very long time before anyone from Australia came to these conferences. And that is where you get the knowledge, you meet the people, you make the networks. It's critical. If you're going to work in FASD in Australia, you need that connection with Canada and the United States. Okay, well, I hope that was interesting. Thank you very much. And remember, stop drinking before you start trying. Thank you. Bye-bye.